So, what if I were to tell you that Eiichiro Oda, the mangaka behind One Piece, and Hideaki Anno, the creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion, two series I'd wager you've heard of and probably have strong opinions on, regardless of if you've read or watched either. What if I were to tell you that these two titans of their respective mediums both gave their recommendation to a new Jump manga? What kind of series do you picture? Genuinely, I'm curious. Comment down below what your gut reaction is. Doesn't have to be long, we can just say genre, setting, and prevailing theme. Maybe it's a battle shonen set in space that focuses on humanity's innate and often destructive desire for control. Or maybe it's a detective series that's set in Tokyo and deals with the modern era's supersaturation of information. Really, with how dense both One Piece and Evangelion are, I can see your minds wandering to any corner of the storytelling spectrum. Well, I'm happy to say you don't have to guess or speculate any longer, because such a series has graced the pages of Shonen Jump, and its name is Akane-banashi, a manga about Rakugo. The series is written by Yuki Suenaga and illustrated by Takamasa Moe, and debuted in Shonen Jump issue 11 on February 14th, 2022. And right off the bat, I'm sure there's a temptation to label it as breaking some Shonen Jump mold because it's not a punchy fight series, but that's only half right. Yes, Akane-banashi is fairly unique in terms of subject matter. Counting it, there's still less than a dozen manga that revolve around Rakugo, but thematically, it's as passionate, competitive, and compelling as any of its contemporaries. And once I break it down, I think you'll agree with me that Akane-banashi is indeed shonen as fuck. And you'll understand why it's received such glowing recommendations from some of anime and manga's biggest figures. Now, unlike the works of Oda and Anno, there's a decent chance you have at best a vague idea of what Rakugo is. So let's start there. Rakugo in its simplest form is a type of verbal entertainment that focuses on a single storyteller reciting often comedic stories for an audience. You can think of it as vaguely similar to stand-up comedy, but the stories are almost always a part of an existing collection. Also, unlike stand-up comedy, the Rakugoka literally isn't allowed to stand up and remains sitting for the entire performance while using only a paper fan and small cloth as props. The story is told with the Rakugoka embodying the role of every significant character in the story in the first person. I'll include some links down below to performances if you want to familiarize yourself more, but hopefully my description is enough for you to at least understand the art form at a basic level. All that out of the way, let's jump into it. Despite being the series' namesake, Akane Osaki is technically not the main character of the first chapter. She's central to it, but it's her father who literally takes center stage as a Rakugoka. And it's through his love for the craft that we see Akane likewise develop a deep passion for it. A passion that primes her to take up the role of protagonist after her father is unceremoniously expelled from the world of Rakugo. With her father's flames snuffed out with no remorse, Akane sets out with her own spark to reach the apex of her craft and make the world recognize how great her father's storytelling was. It's a pretty straightforward setup that immediately dips its toes into the theme of passing the torch from one generation to the next. It's also a pretty damn compelling motivation, and Akane absolutely shines as she charges headfirst into this new world she's desperate to know. I could go on, and truth be told I kind of want to, but the actual execution of the story is better read than described, especially as it's a manga with no sci-fi or fantasy elements. Speaking to you about how skilled Akane is at, well, speaking, is only going to be so effective. So if what I've said isn't enough to convince you to give it a shot, then just trust me when I say the series has no wasted momentum through its entire run so far. And it manages to portray Rakugo incredibly despite not being able to utilize one of the art form's greatest strengths, sound. As I said earlier, Rakugo is literally described as verbal entertainment where changing tone and pitch is often the easiest way to signal to an audience that you're representing a different character. It's storytelling 101. Just take a look at... I can't believe I'm using this as an example. Take a look at TikTok. Boot up the app and I bet you don't have to scroll for too long before you see a skit with someone doing exactly this. Now, they also have the benefit of props, costumes, and camera cuts to aid in distinguishing personas. Rakugo boils this down to the basics, which means it's entirely on the storyteller's verbal skill to guide you through the routine in a way that's both coherent and can make you laugh. So, bearing all that in mind, you might think manga isn't the best medium to use if you want to play to Rakugo's strengths. And I don't think you're entirely wrong. Still though, how has Akane-banashi managed to bridge this gap and then some? Well, a lot of it comes down to the art. Make no mistake, I'm not dismissing the writing, it definitely plays a key role in the appeal of the characters, but it's Suenaga's layouts combined with Moe's artwork that give the series a leg up. One way this takes shape is the level of stylization that each individual Rakugoka is given. Not too dissimilar from a battle shonen, while talking up a rival or ally, the paneling crescendos into a spread that highlights the specific performer's specialty. Take for example Koguma. You see him flanked by stacks and stacks of books, reflecting the depths to which he goes when researching a story he performs. Hikaru has a background as an actress and other more modern forms of entertainment, so her spread is a low-angle shot accentuated with a spotlight you'd find in the theater. And the list goes on, with each feeling incredibly distinct based on the situation, character, and the relationship to Akane. This is also paired with some excellent paneling decisions that can accentuate a performance just as much as the art. My favorite example of this is during one of Akane's early performances. She's on stage in a retirement home, and therefore she begins the story at a relatively slow pace. Throughout the next few pages, the paneling is at first glance simple, but very intentional. We start with 4 regular horizontal panels, then 5, then 6, and finally by the time we get to 7, the realization ideally has dawned on us at the same time as Kyoji, that her tempo has been slowly but surely picking up and she successfully manages to wrap up the audience in her story. It also helps that this basic paneling is flanked by some really creative compositional choices. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it shows a strong understanding of the medium's strengths. But this aesthetic and these choices are only one half of the visual equation of Akane-banashi. The other, and maybe you've managed to guess it as I've been showing off panels, is the facial expressions. This is largely how the series has been able to bridge the gap to convey the different persona of a character, as well as just be funny. Obviously, not being bound by realistic anatomy allows for as much range as Suenaga and Moe want for a given performance. It makes for compelling composition, especially when paired with the character the performer is meant to be representing. And these faces aren't just limited to the Rakugo performances, making the entire manga a delight to read. Suenaga and Moe absolutely nailed the emotion of every face, and that's not too surprising considering the duo's history. In 2021, they released the one-shot Tatarashido, centered around 2 high school students wanting to do stand-up comedy. I haven't been able to find a translation for it, but that's okay because it's no coincidence that, as you can see, this subject matter is also very well suited to exaggerated facial expressions. And well, to be clear, this part is conjecture. I believe that had Shoha Shoten, a manga with an almost identical premise, not debuted in Jump SQ near the end of 2021, then Suenaga and Moe might have serialized their one-shot instead. That's not to say Tatarashido would have flopped or that I would have preferred it. I just find it neat that if the duo did indeed have to pivot, that they were able to still come up with a series and subject matter that made use of their skills and strengths. To me, that's just the sign of flexible and talented creators. And I think that versatility is also present in the fact that the duo have opted to keep the actual Rakugo as a more secondary appeal. Mainly, they serve as a vehicle for the character drama. You're meant to get more wrapped up in Akane as a performer than the actual story she's telling. At least that's my reading of it, based on the fact that we've only gotten 1 or 2 complete stories, and even then, most of the time those stories are also interrupted by exposition or explanation. Not to mention that since they're also largely comedic, they're not exactly meant to have a lot of drama in them themselves. But I am also coming at this from a point of someone who really doesn't know all that much about Rakugo. It's entirely possible that seeing bits of stories recited differently is incredibly fun simply because you know its origin. I can't personally say, but if that works for you, more power to ya. And I suppose that brings us back to the question of why Oda and Anno enjoy Akane-banashi enough to lend its earliest volumes their support. Well, for Oda, I can only really speculate as he doesn't say a lot in his recommendation beyond a general positive sentiment, but I think it comes down to the series just having a rock-solid foundation from the start that it's only built on chapter after chapter. Anno provides a bit more insight and actually touches on some of what we've already discussed. He writes, "The basis of Rakugo is stillness, since only facial expressions and words generate movement. It's amazing to see it depicted as a classic Royal Road Shonen Jump manga with the ability to structure the story through the flow of emotions and expressions only possible thanks to the characters, backgrounds, bubbles, and onomatopoeia. Please give it a read." I think Ano really sums up the core of the series perfectly. Akane-banashi utilizes the medium's strengths in a way that manages to convey the appeal of Rakugo as an art form without sacrificing what makes a Shonen Jump manga so resonant and passionate. It's not often we get a combo like that right out of the gate, and I think it's a big reason why the series has been received as well as it has. Also, as a complete sidebar, I could not find a good place to fit this in, but Jump occasionally releases these voice comics of early chapters for their manga, and Akane-banashi's VAs for Akane and her dad are a father-daughter duo who themselves are Rakugoka, and I just think that's really sweet and cute. But for my money, Akane-banashi is one of the best series to debut and survive in Shonen Jump in a hot minute. It's certainly one of the ones I look forward to most week in and week out, right alongside a certain other series that I have talked about on this channel. If you haven't checked it out because you thought maybe it would only make sense if you're really into Rakugo, I think the series is pretty beginner friendly and even goes as far as to use manga analogies for some Rakugo terms. Speaking again as someone who went in as a total beginner, trust me when I say you won't regret it. But maybe you have been reading it, in which case let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. Also, if there are any other specific newer manga series you would like me to cover, feel free to let me know that as well. Regardless, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.